After 3 years of silence, I received a letter from my daughter, but when I looked closely, the hope that blossomed in my chest for a second withered and turned to dust. My eyes, accustomed to examining tiny pieces under a magnifying glass, did not deceive me. The handwriting was almost perfect, a careful imitation of Jessica's elegant strokes. Almost. The little loop on the letter J in her name was wrong. It was a tiny detail, a little turn she always made inward, almost like a secret. The person who wrote this made the turn outward, an impossible mistake for her but invisible to anyone else. A detail that only a father who had watched her learn to write would notice. My heart, which had beaten faster for a moment, returned to its slow, heavy rhythm. That letter was not from my daughter. It was a message. If my search for justice has caught your attention, subscribe to the channel. I want to share every step of my journey, and perhaps together, we can prevent other families from going through the same nightmare. I opened the envelope with steady hands, the tremor of age controlled by the coldness that had taken hold of me. Inside, there was no "Dear Father" or any words of affection. There was only a folded sheet of paper. On it, typed, were two things: a name, Marco, and the address of a warehouse in the city's industrial zone. Nothing else. I sat down in my worn armchair, the paper resting in my hand. The old pendulum clock on the wall marked each second with relentless precision. Tick-tock. Each beat was like a nail hammered into the silence of my apartment. Marco, the name of the man who destroyed my daughter's life, the architect of her ruin, who left her with nothing and disappeared like smoke. For 3 years, that name was poison coursing through my veins, a source of pain and helplessness. Now it was there, on a piece of paper, delivered by an unknown sender. It wasn't a love letter, it was a weapon. And I, an old clockmaker, knew exactly what to do with a precision tool. In the days that followed, the routine of my apartment changed. The passive mourning that consumed me gave way to quiet, focused activity. My old work table, covered with a thin layer of dust, was cleaned. The magnifying glasses, tweezers, and small screwdrivers were organized. I wasn't repairing watches. I was dismantling a life. The internet, a tool I used only to read the news, became my field of research. The name Marco was everywhere. He was a respected businessman, a man who donated to charity and appeared in social columns. His public image was impeccable, a facade of polished gold. But every watch, no matter how beautiful, has hidden gears, and I knew that somewhere there was a defective part, a weak spring about to break. The warehouse address was my starting point. I didn't go there right away. Patience is a watchmaker's virtue. Haste breaks the most delicate parts. First, I watched from afar. I spent days in a small cafe across the street, a simple place with foggy windows, from where I had a clear view of the warehouse gate. I ordered only coffee and stayed for hours, watching the trucks come and go. I wrote down times, license plates, the drivers' faces. I was just a lonely old man, invisible to the world. No one paid any attention to me, and that was exactly what I wanted. I noticed a pattern. Most of the trucks belonged to well-known logistics and transportation companies, but one, in particular, was different. An unmarked truck that always arrived late Tuesday afternoon and left before dawn on Wednesday. It was discreet, fast, and operated outside business hours. It was the cog out of place. A week later, I decided to get closer. I put on old work clothes, a cap to hide my face, and walked through the streets of the industrial district as if I were an employee of a nearby factory. The smell of metal and oil in the air was familiar. I reached the back of Marco's warehouse. Security was lax based on the idea that no one would be interested in an ordinary warehouse. I found what I was looking for near the dumpsters: crumpled cargo manifests, documents that should have been destroyed. Someone had been careless. I took the papers home. Under the bright light of my lamp, I unfolded each sheet with the care of someone restoring an ancient document. Most listed electronics and machinery parts, all legal. But in one of them, at the bottom of the pile, I found a handwritten note. It was a series of codes and numbers that made no sense, next to a list of imported luxury goods, things that didn't fit with Marco's official business. He was using the warehouse to smuggle goods, evading taxes. It was a small operation, but a dirty one, a stain on his armor of perfection. It was the crack I was looking for. The next step required the same precision as setting a clock. I couldn't just go to the police. Men like Marco had connections, expensive lawyers. A report from an anonymous old man would be easily hushed up. I needed someone with an interest in exposing the truth, someone who saw this as an opportunity. I remembered a name I had seen in some online articles while researching. Bruno, a young investigative journalist who was trying to make a name for himself at a digital newspaper in the city. He was known for being ambitious and not afraid to mess with powerful people. He was the perfect tool. I put together a small package. Inside, I placed copies of the cargo manifests, highlighting the suspicious note. I added photos I had taken of the unmarked truck, with the license plate clearly visible. I didn't write any letters, no explanations, just the facts. The truth needs no embellishment. I sent the package to the newspaper's newsroom without a return address, and then I waited. The weeks passed at the slow and steady pace of my pendulum clock. Tick-tock. I read the news every day, but there was nothing. Doubt began to gnaw at me. Had the package been ignored? Was the journalist afraid? Revenge is a delicate mechanism. If a single piece fails, everything stops. But my faith in my own methodology was strong. I had chosen the right tool and placed it in the right place. It was only a matter of time before the mainspring unwound. And then, on a gray morning, it happened. A small news item in the business section of Bruno's newspaper. The headline was discreet: Investigation into tax irregularities at import company. Marco's name was not mentioned, but the warehouse address was there. It was the beginning, the first turn of the key. From that day on, the story snowballed. Bruno was good at what he did. The small note became a cover story. The tax authorities, pressured by media attention, began a full audit of Marco's business. Each new revelation was like a tick on my clock, marking the progress of my plan. They discovered not only smuggling but an entire network of tax evasion and money laundering. Marco's good guy image began to crack, then shatter into 1,000 pieces. His partners distanced themselves. The banks froze his credit. The man who seemed untouchable was falling, and I watched it all from my small apartment, a silent spectator in the front row. I felt no joy, no euphoria. I felt a cold calm, the satisfaction of a craftsman who sees his complex work function perfectly. Marco's final downfall was reported on all channels. He was arrested, his assets were confiscated, and his reputation, which he valued so much, was turned into shame. The man who acted above the law was brought down by a crumpled piece of paper and the patience of an old man who had all the time in the world. That night, for the first time in 3 years, the silence in my apartment felt different. The ticking of the clock was no longer a reminder of my pain, but a melody of justice served. I picked up the photograph of my daughter that sat on my nightstand. Her eyes smiled at me. I didn't know where she was, if she was safe. The anonymous letter never gave me that answer, but I had done the only thing I could. I had restored balance. I dismantled the man who broke her piece by piece, with the same precision and lack of emotion with which I would repair a clock. Revenge did not bring her back, but it cleared the air, and in the silence of my solitude, that was the closest I could get to peace. The peace that settled in was strange, like a tidy room where there had once been a mess. Everything was in its place, but the space seemed larger, emptier. Marco's fall did not fill the hole left by my daughter's absence. It only cleaned it, removing the debris that prevented me from seeing how deep it really was. I returned to my workbench, to the small gears and delicate hands. I tried to find solace in the precision of my craft, the same precision I used to plan that man's ruin. But something had changed. Before, repairing a clock was giving life to time. Now it seemed like just a way to pass the time I had left. The ticking of the pendulum clock was no longer a countdown to justice. It was just the sound of loneliness, beat by beat, echoing in an apartment that was too quiet. Revenge had been a complex mechanism that I had assembled and watched work. But like every clock, once it completes its cycle, it stops, and I was at a standstill again. Months passed. Autumn arrived, painting the few trees I could see from my window with shades of yellow and brown. Marco's story became old news, replaced by more recent scandals. The world had moved on. I, however, remained stuck on that day, in the silence that followed his arrest. I read the newspaper every day, no longer looking for news about him but for anything, a small sign, a familiar name in a footnote that could lead me to Jessica. Nothing. The void that revenge left began to be filled by an old acquaintance, helplessness. Destroying a bad man was one thing. Finding a lost daughter in an indifferent world was quite another. Precision was of no use to me in this. There were no gears to dismantle, only an endless silence to face, until on a rainy morning it happened again. A brown envelope identical to the first was in the middle of my mail. My heart leapt, a mixture of fear and hope that I thought had died. My hands, which had begun to tremble again with age, tore the paper open with an urgency that surprised me. Inside was another folded sheet of paper with typed words. The message was short, almost a code. It only said the name of a park on the other side of town, a time for the next day, and a sentence that froze my blood. Bring the photograph that is on your bedside table. The person who helped me wasn't done. She didn't just want revenge. And more frightening, she knew my most intimate habits. They knew about the photo of Jessica that I looked at every night before going to sleep. This was no longer a power game against Marco. It was personal. I spent the rest of the day and night on high alert. The calculating coldness that had guided me for months gave way to raw anxiety. Who was this person? A friend of Jessica's? Someone Marco had also hurt? The doubt was a faulty mechanism, making my mind spin without going anywhere. The next day, I went to the park hours before the agreed time. It was a quiet place with wooden benches and a small lake. I watched the people, mothers with children, elderly people playing chess. No one seemed suspicious. It was too normal a setting for the meeting that awaited me. As the appointed time approached, I sat down on the bench indicated in the message, near an old fountain. Jessica's photograph inside my coat seemed to burn against my chest. I was a watchmaker in a world without watches, waiting for a time I couldn't control. The minutes dragged on. Every person who approached made my heart race. Finally, a middle-aged woman, dressed in an elegant coat but with a face marked by sadness, walked slowly toward me. She didn't look at me but sat down at the other end of the bench as if she were just another stranger. We sat in silence for a long time, listening only to the sound of the water in the fountain. Then she spoke, her voice low and steady. "I'm Sonia," she said, without turning around. "I was Marco's wife." The name hit me like a punch. I was sitting next to someone who, once upon a time, was part of the world of the man I destroyed. I tried to read her expression, but she kept her gaze fixed on the lake. Sonia began to tell her story. She was Marco's first victim. Years before he met Jessica, he destroyed her in the same way. He isolated her, took her money, and discarded her when she was no longer useful. She spent years in silence, planning a way to fight back, but she knew that as his ex-wife, no one would believe her. He was a master at making people look crazy, she said bitterly. I needed someone who couldn't be discredited, someone with real, visible pain, someone like you. She was the one who sent me the first letter. She had been investigating Marco for years, uncovering his small illegal operations. The warehouse was just one of them. She gave me the first piece, knowing that my watchmaker's patience would do the rest. "The handwriting," I whispered, the question stuck in my throat. "How did you know about the detail in the letter, J?" For the first time, Sonia turned to me. There were tears in her eyes, but her voice didn't waver. "Marco kept everything. In a box of old things I found letters that Jessica wrote to a college friend before she met him. I studied her handwriting for days. I needed you to know that it wasn't her, but that the message was about her. The mistake was intentional. It was a sign, just for you." The intelligence of her plan was frightening and brilliant. She didn't just use me as a tool. She understood me. She knew that one tiny detail would be the key to triggering the whole mechanism of my revenge. So I asked the only question that mattered, the question that had kept me awake for 3 years. "Where is my daughter?" Sonia's firmness disappeared, her face filled with genuine pain. "That's the part I'm not sure about," she confessed. "After Marco left her, she disappeared. But in his papers I found something. Monthly payments to a place, a nursing home called Hope Care Center, in a small town a few hours from here. The payments stopped almost 3 years ago, around the same time she disappeared. She handed me a piece of paper with the address written on it. I don't know what you'll find there. It may be nothing, but it's the only clue I have. Marco never spent money without a reason." She stood up, adjusting her coat. Her mission was accomplished. She had gotten her revenge through me, and now she was giving me the only thing she could in return, a crumb of hope. "He broke us, me and your daughter," she said, her voice now soft. "But men like him don't understand. Broken pieces can still be used to build something new, or to dismantle a rotten machine." She looked me in the eye, a look of complicity between two survivors. "I hope you find your peace, the real kind." With that, she turned and walked away, blending in with the other people in the park, leaving me alone on the bench with an address in my hand and a heart beating wildly. I stayed there for a long time, the paper trembling in my hand. Revenge was complete, but the story was not over. That address was a new beginning, a new mechanism for understanding. It was no longer about dismantling, but about searching, perhaps about rebuilding. I took Jessica's photograph out of my pocket. Her smile seemed more real, closer. For the first time in a long time, the ticking in my head was not about the time that had passed, but about the time that could still come. I stored the address with the care of someone who keeps the most valuable part of a watch. The journey was not over yet. In fact, it was just beginning. The bus trip to the small town in the countryside was long and silent. I watched the landscape pass by the window, the large concrete buildings giving way to green fields and small houses. Each kilometer traveled seemed to unwind a spring inside me, releasing a tension I didn't even know I was carrying. Revenge against Marco was a precision job, carried out in an environment I knew. Silence, observation, patience. Now I was heading into unknown territory, guided by a single word, hope. And hope is not a cog. It is fragile, unpredictable, and can break at the slightest carelessness. I arrived at my destination in the late afternoon. The city was calm, with an air of time standing still that was strangely familiar to me. I found a small guest house to spend the night, a simple place with dark wood furniture. I couldn't sleep. The ticking of my own wristwatch seemed to scream in the silence of the room, each beat a question. What if there's nothing there? What if it's just another dead end? The next morning I walked to the address Sonia gave me. The Hope Care Center was not a modern hospital. It was an old, 2-story building with light-colored paint that was peeling in places. It had a well-kept garden in front, with a few rose bushes. It seemed like a peaceful place, perhaps even a little sad. I took a deep breath, my hand clutching the piece of paper with the address in my coat pocket, as if it were a good luck charm. I entered the reception area. The place was clean, quiet, and smelled of cleaning products mixed with a slight aroma of tea. A middle-aged woman in a nurse's uniform was behind the counter, organizing some papers. She looked up and gave me a tired smile. "Good morning. How can I help you?" she asked. Her badge said Lucia Lucia. Good morning, I replied, my voice a little hoarser than I expected. I'm looking for someone. She may have been here a few years ago. Her name is Jessica. Lucia frowned thoughtfully. Jessica? I don't remember any patient with that name recently. My heart sank a little. It was almost 3 years ago, I insisted. The payments for her stay came from someone named Marco. Upon hearing Marco's name, Lucia's expression changed. The tired smile disappeared, replaced by a mask of caution. That name is not unfamiliar to us, she said quietly, looking around as if the walls could hear. But I can't discuss patient information, past or present. It's against the rules. I knew it would be like this. Precision has taught me that brute force rarely works. You have to find the right point to apply pressure. I took Jessica's photo out of my pocket, the same one Sonia had asked me to bring to the park, and placed it on the counter. This is my daughter, I said, my voice firm, but filled with a pain I couldn't hide. I just need to know if she's okay, if she's alive. For 3 years I've had no news. Lucia looked at the photo, then into my eyes. She saw something there, the same pain that Sonia must have seen. She hesitated for a moment, biting her lower lip. Wait here, she said finally, and disappeared down a hallway. The minutes that followed were the longest of my life. The clock on the wall in the reception area seemed to move in slow motion. Tick-tock. Each second was an eternity of doubt. I heard muffled voices coming from the hallway, but I couldn't make out the words. Finally, Lucia returned, accompanied by an older man with gray hair and glasses. He introduced himself as Mr. Alberto, the administrator of the facility. His face was serious, but his eyes were not cold. Sir, he began, Lucia told me your story, and she showed me the photo. Confidentiality is our main rule, but there are exceptional situations. He paused, choosing his words carefully. We haven't had any patients named Jessica, but we did have a young woman who arrived around the time you mentioned. She was brought in by that man, Marco. She was in a state of deep confusion and sadness. He registered her under another name, Anna. He said she was a distant cousin with no family, who needed a quiet place to recover from trauma. Anna, a simple, common name, a way to hide her from the world. Is she still here? I asked, feeling my whole body tremble. Mr. Alberto nodded slowly. Yes, she's here. Marco's payment stopped a long time ago, but we couldn't just put her out on the street. Anna, she's a sweet person, but she lives in her own world. Her memory of the past is fragmented. She rarely talks about what happened before she got here. My brain, accustomed to assembling complex mechanisms, was struggling to process this information. Jessica was alive. She was safe, but she was no longer Jessica. She was Anna, a woman with a blank past. Can I see her? My voice was almost a whisper. Mr. Alberto looked at Lucia, who nodded in agreement. Yes, but please take it easy. It may be a shock to her. She doesn't get visitors. Lucia guided me down a quiet corridor. We passed closed doors from which came soft sounds of televisions or low conversations. We stopped in front of a door at the end of the corridor, which opened onto a small internal garden. She likes to stay here, tending to the flowers, said Lucia, her voice gentle. And then I saw her, my daughter. She had her back to me, kneeling in front of a flower bed, with a small gardening shovel in her hand. Her hair was shorter than I remembered, but it was the same shade of brown. She was wearing simple clothes, a light-colored dress, and an apron. She looked peaceful. For a moment I just stood there, paralyzed, recording every detail of that scene. Revenge against Marco gave me a cold satisfaction, but seeing my daughter there, alive, breathing, was like feeling the sun on my face after a 3-year winter. Lucia gave me a light squeeze on the arm. I'll leave you two alone, she whispered, and discreetly withdrew. I walked slowly through the garden, my shoes making a soft noise on the grass. The sound made her stop what she was doing. She turned, and our eyes met. Her eyes, they were the same, but the light in them was different. There was a mist, a distance. She didn't recognize me. She looked at me with the polite curiosity reserved for a stranger. Hello, she said, her voice soft, almost childlike. Are you lost? My heart broke into 1,000 pieces, but I remained calm. Haste breaks the most delicate pieces. I sat down on a stone bench near her. No, I replied. I came to see someone, and I ended up finding this beautiful garden. She smiled, a genuine smile. I take care of it. Flowers need patience. Patience. The word hit me hard. It was the virtue I used for revenge, and it was the virtue I would need for reconstruction. I stayed there, talking to her for almost an hour. I didn't talk about the past. I didn't say who I was. I talked about flowers, about time, about clocks. I told her how the small gears need to work together in perfect harmony for time to move forward. She listened to me attentively, fascinated. At one point, she touched my old wristwatch. It's beautiful, she said. It looks like it has many stories. It does, I replied, my voice breaking. Many stories. When it was time to leave, she looked at me and said, "Will you come back?" Yes, I promised. I'll come back every day. As I left the Hope Care Center, the weight on my chest felt different. The pain of absence had been replaced by the complex task of starting over. Dismantling Marco's life was easy. It was a predictable mechanism. Rebuilding my daughter's memory, piece by piece, would be the most difficult and delicate work of my life. But for the first time in a long time, the ticking of the clock did not sound like a countdown to the end. It sounded like the beginning of a new time, a time of healing. The trip back to my city was different. The bus swayed gently on the road, but the turmoil was was all inside me. Revenge against Marco had been a cold plan, a series of logical steps that I executed with the calmness of someone assembling a clock. I knew what each piece did, where it fit, and what the end result would be. It was a machine of destruction, and it worked perfectly. But what I found at the Hope Care Center was not a machine. It was my daughter, fragile and broken in a way that no tool of mine could fix. The feeling that overwhelmed me was not one of victory, but of immense and delicate responsibility. That ticking in my head, which had previously marked the countdown to justice, now measured the patience needed for healing, and I knew that this would be a much, much longer countdown. I started my new routine the next day. Every morning I took the first bus to the small town and spent the day at the nursing home. At first I was just a silent visitor. I would sit with her in the garden while she tended to her flowers. I didn't introduce myself as her father. To her, I was just a friendly man who liked to talk. We talked about simple things: the weather, the colors of the roses, the taste of the tea that Lucia brought us in the afternoon. I told stories about my profession, about how small pieces of metal, when organized in the right way, could measure the passage of an entire life. She listened with calm attention, her eyes distant, but sometimes a small smile appeared on her face. I never mentioned the name Jessica. I never asked about the past. I was there to build something new, not to dig up painful ruins. Each day was like winding a stopped clock, one turn at a time without forcing it, just waiting for the mechanism to start moving on its own. After 2 weeks of daily visits, Mr. Alberto called me into his office for a chat. With him was a middle-aged man with a calm and professional air who introduced himself as Dr. Ricardo, the doctor who was following Anna's case. He looked at me seriously. "Sir," Dr. Ricardo began in a thoughtful voice, "we see the good that your visits are doing for Anna. She seems more present, more connected to the world around her. But I need to be very clear. Her mind has built a barrier to protect itself from great trauma. Forcing our way through that barrier could cause more harm than good." He paused, making sure I understood the weight of his words. "We don't know what she will find if her memory returns. It could be a relief, or it could be a pain she cannot bear. We need to proceed with extreme caution. No direct questions, no objects or names that could be a violent trigger." I just nodded. His words confirmed what my watchmaker's instinct had already told me. A spring pressed too hard does not spring back into place. It breaks forever. That night in my apartment, I looked at my work table. The tools were all there, clean and organized. Fine tweezers, tiny screwdrivers, magnifying glasses of different magnifications. For months, they had been my weapons. With them, I analyzed documents, studied photos, found the weakness in Marco's mechanism. Now they seemed useless. The task ahead of me did not require mental precision, but soul precision. It required me to understand silences, glances, smiles that lasted only a second. It required me to know when to speak, and more importantly, when to remain silent. I was no longer dealing with gears and springs, but with feelings and memories, invisible and infinitely more complex things. Revenge gave me a cold purpose. The search for my daughter gave me a new reason to live. I had been a craftsman of destruction. Now I needed to relearn how to be a craftsman of patience and care. What would you do with this information? Leave your comment. Every opinion is a valuable piece in the puzzle of my search for the truth. A month passed. The leaves on the trees in the center's garden began to change color, heralding the arrival of fall. My relationship with Anna deepened into a quiet friendship. She waited for me in the garden every morning. Sometimes we read together. Other times, we just sat in silence, watching the birds. One rainy afternoon, we were in the living room, watching the water run down the window. The sound of the rain was constant and soothing. I decided to take a small step. I began to tell a story about a little girl who lived in a house with a large pendulum clock just like mine. I didn't say it was her. I said she was the daughter of an old friend of mine. I told how the girl, instead of drawing houses and trees like the other children, liked to draw the mechanisms of her father's clocks. She filled pages and pages with imaginary gears and hands. I described the concentration on that girl's face, the way the tip of her tongue stuck to the corner of her mouth when she focused on a detail. As I spoke, I noticed that Anna had stopped watching the rain. Her eyes were fixed on me, but her gaze was different. It was no longer distant. There was a spark of something, a faint light in a dark room. She frowned, as if trying to catch a thought that was slipping through her fingers. When I finished the story, she was silent for a long time. The only sound was the rain and the ticking of a wall clock in the room. Then she spoke, her voice so low it was almost a whisper. "That's funny," she said, looking at her hands. For a second, I could smell clock oil. My heart stopped. It was the first piece, the first little gear that moved after 3 years of standing still. I didn't say anything. I just smiled. I knew I couldn't show the emotion that was overwhelming me. I just smiled and changed the subject, talking about how good the rain was for the flowers she loved so much. That night, on the trip back, the hope inside me was different. It was no longer an abstract idea or a desperate desire. It was something real, tangible. It was the smell of clock oil in a lost memory. It was a small fragment of Jessica inside Anna. I knew the road would be long and full of uncertainties. Maybe she would never remember everything. Maybe the Jessica I knew was lost forever. But there, on that bus, I understood understood that my job was not to force the old Jessica back. My job was to help Anna find her own way, to build her own identity, perhaps using some of the old pieces that were stored somewhere in her mind. I was helping her build a new clock, one that might not keep time in the same way as the old one, but one that would work, one that would have its own rhythm, its own beats. I arrived at my apartment, and for the first time in a long time, the silence didn't feel heavy. The ticking of the old pendulum clock sounded like a lullaby. Revenge against Marco was like stopping a malfunctioning clock, breaking it forever. What I was doing now was much more difficult. It was like finding an old and precious clock broken and abandoned, and with all the care in the world trying to make it work again, piece by piece, memory by memory, smile by smile. I didn't know how long it would take, months, maybe years, but a clockmaker knows that time is not the enemy. It's just what we use to measure it, and I had all the time in the world for my daughter. Justice had been done. Now it was time for healing, and healing, I was discovering, was the most precise and beautiful form of revenge against pain. It was proof that, even after the worst of storms, life could slowly get its hands back on the clock. The trip back to my city was different. The bus swayed gently on the road, but the turmoil was all inside me. Revenge against Marco had been a cold plan, a series of logical steps that I executed with the calmness of someone assembling a clock. I knew what each piece did, where it fit, and what the end result would be. It was a machine of destruction, and it worked perfectly. But what I found at the Hope Care Center was not a machine. It was my daughter, fragile and broken in a way that no tool of mine could fix. The feeling that overwhelmed me was not one of victory, but of immense and delicate responsibility. That ticking in my head, which had previously marked the countdown to justice, now measured the patience needed for healing, and I knew that this would be a much, much longer countdown. The trip back to my city was different. The bus swayed gently on the road, but the turmoil was all inside me. Revenge against Marco had been a cold plan, a series of logical steps that I executed with the calmness of someone assembling a clock. I knew what each piece did, where it fit, and what the end result would be. It was a machine of destruction, and it worked perfectly. But what I found at the Hope Care Center was not a machine. It was my daughter, fragile and broken in a way that no tool of mine could fix. The feeling that overwhelmed me was not one of victory, but of immense and delicate responsibility. That ticking in my head, which had previously marked the countdown to justice, now measured the patience needed for healing, and I knew that this would be a much, much longer countdown. Days turned into weeks, and autumn gave way to the first cold winds of winter. My routine became as precise as the mechanism of one of my watches. Wake up early, catch the first bus, arrive at the nursing home mid-morning, and spend the day with Anna. We would sit in the garden, now covered with dry leaves, or in the living room, near the window, watching the gray sky. I continued telling my stories about the old watchmaker and his curious daughter. With each story I added a new detail, the way she organized the pieces by size, the way she cleaned the gears with a soft brush, and with each detail I saw a small light flash in her eyes, a spark of recognition, not from memory but from feeling. It was as if her soul remembered what her mind had forgotten. She began to smile more. They were small smiles that didn't last long, but they were like the first tick of a clock that had been stopped for a long time. One afternoon I decided to bring something different. It was a small wooden puzzle with complex pieces that fit together to form a box. I placed it on the table between us without saying anything. Anna looked at the scattered pieces with curiosity. After a moment she reached out and picked up two pieces that, to me, seemed unrelated. With a smooth, confident movement, she put them together. They fit perfectly. She continued, picking up piece by piece with silent concentration. The tip of her tongue appeared at the corner of her mouth, just like in my story. I stood there watching, my heart pounding in my chest. She wasn't just putting together a puzzle. She was showing me that the architect inside her, the girl who saw how things worked, was still there, dormant but alive. In less than 10 minutes, the box was assembled. She looked at the object in her hands and then at me, with a look of surprise, as if she didn't know where that skill had come from. "I didn't know I could do that," she said, her voice low. "I think you can do many things you haven't discovered yet," I replied, with a calm smile, but a watchmaker's patience is also tested. There were nights when I would return to my empty apartment and the silence was overwhelming. Progress seemed too slow, almost invisible. Doubt, like rust on a gear, began to creep in. Was I doing the right thing? Wouldn't it be easier to just tell the truth, to say, "I am your father, your name is Jessica"? I would pick up her photograph, and the pain of longing was physical, like a stab in the chest. I wanted my daughter back, not that sweet, kind stranger who took care of flowers. At times like these, I would go to my desk and pick up the smallest parts of a clock. I would look at them through a magnifying glass, reminding myself that the most complex mechanisms are made of the most delicate parts. Forcing apart is the quickest way to break everything, and I couldn't risk breaking her a second time. Dr. Ricardo called me in for another conversation. He had a report in his hands and a careful look on his face. "Your visits are having a remarkable effect," he said. "The nurses report that Anna is more talkative, more present. She has even started helping Lucia with some simple administrative tasks. She likes to organize papers, put things in order." He paused. "But I want to give you some advice, from a professional to a father. Don't wait for a miracle. The memory that has been lost may never never fully return. What you are building is something new, a new relationship, and perhaps that is the most important thing. His words were like a fine adjustment to the mechanism of my heart. He was right. I was so focused on fixing the past that perhaps I was not giving due value to the present I was building with her day after day. The following week I made a decision. I placed the pieces of an old simple pocket watch in a small velvet box. It wasn't a test, but an invitation. That afternoon, in the living room, I opened the box on the table. "I thought you might like to see what one of these looks like inside," I said. "The pieces that make time tick." Anna leaned in to look. Her fingers touched the mainspring, the balance wheel, the small golden gears. There was a reverence in her touch, a familiarity that did not come from the mind. I began to explain, in simple terms, the function of each piece. She said nothing, just listened, her eyes fixed on my hands as I pointed to each component. Then I picked up 2 gears that were supposed to fit together and placed them side by side. Before I could say anything, her hand moved. She picked up the 2 pieces and with impressive delicacy joined them together. The sound of the metal fitting together was almost inaudible, but to me, it sounded like a bell. She continued to hold the pieces, looking at them as if they were a treasure. Her eyes filled with tears, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of confusion, of a deep emotion she could not name. She looked at me, and for the first time, I felt that she was really seeing me, not just the kind gentleman who visited her. "This," she began, her voice faltering, "this feels right, like coming home." Home. The word hung in the air between us. My instinct was to hug her, to tell her everything, but I held back. The spring was unwinding at its own pace. I just smiled, feeling my own tears wanting to escape. "Yes," I said softly, "sometimes things just fall into place." That day, when Lucia walked me to the door, she had a smile I had never seen on her tired face. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it," she said. Today, after you left, she asked me if we had any books about clocks in our little library. It's the first time she's shown interest in anything from the outside world. The news filled me with a calm and deep joy. The mechanism was starting to work. The pieces were moving, slowly but in harmony. The trip home was the lightest I've ever had. Revenge against Marco was an act of dismantling, a work of separation, of breaking something until there was nothing left. What I was doing with my daughter was the opposite. It was an act of assembly, a work of putting together, of connecting, of building something from broken pieces. Revenge left me empty, but that little moment of connection filled me in a way I hadn't felt in years. I arrived at my apartment and the ticking of the pendulum clock welcomed me like an old friend. I went to Jessica's photo on the nightstand. Her smile was still there, frozen in time, but now I saw something else. I saw the resilience, the strength that was hidden beneath the pain, the same strength that allowed her soul to remember what her mind had forgotten. I was no longer trying to bring Jessica back. I was getting to know Anna, and I was discovering that she was just as extraordinary as the daughter I had lost. Justice had been served, but true peace did not come from seeing a bad man fall. True peace was coming from seeing my daughter, piece by piece, begin to find herself. Revenge was about the end. This was about the beginning, and I had all the time in the world to watch this new clock begin to mark its own hours. Winter had truly arrived, covering the small town with a white, icy silence. My daily bus rides became darker, both on the way there and on the way back, but the light I found at the Hope Care Center made up for any darkness outside. The small breakthrough with Anna, the memory of the smell of oil, had changed everything. It was no longer a question of if, but of how. I felt I was on the right track, adjusting a delicate mechanism that needed time and the right touch to start working again. I was no longer just visiting a stranger. I was slowly rediscovering my daughter, hidden under layers of pain and forgetfulness. A few days later, I decided to bring a gift. It was nothing big or flashy. It was a small wooden music box that I had made myself for Jessica when she turned 10. The mechanism was visible through a small glass window in the lid. The melody was simple, a lullaby her mother used to sing. I placed the box on the table in the living room, where we sat to escape the cold. Anna looked at the object with the same curiosity she had shown with the clock parts. Her fingers traced the contours of the wood, feeling the texture. "It's beautiful," she said. "It looks old. I made it a long time ago," I replied, watching her every reaction. For someone who was very special to me, I wound the small key on the side. The music began to play, soft and clear. The small metal notes rose and fell, creating the familiar melody. Anna's eyes were fixed on the moving mechanism. She didn't say anything for a long time. She just watched and listened. The music filled the silence between us. When the melody ended, she looked up at me. There was a deep sadness in her eyes, a pain that didn't seem to be hers, but that she felt nonetheless. "This song," she whispered, her voice weak, "it makes my heart ache, but it's a good ache, like missing something you loved very much." She didn't remember the song, but her heart remembered the feeling. It was another piece falling into place. Emotion was the main gear, the source of energy for all memory. I just nodded, afraid that any words from me might break the spell of that moment. She picked up the music box and held it close to her chest, as if protecting something fragile. The following weeks were filled with small, silent miracles. Anna started drawing. At first, it was just flowers and trees from the garden, but one day, Lucia showed me one of her notebooks. Among the petals and leaves, there was a drawing of a gear, and then another. Soon an entire page was covered with the mechanisms of an imaginary clock. They were childish drawings, a little crooked, but the logic was all there. The way the wheels connected, the position of the springs. It was the girl I had described in my stories. It was my Jessica, communicating in the only way she could at the moment. Dr. Ricardo was impressed. He said that her mind was creating new bridges to access old information, using creativity as a tool. One day, as we walked down the hall, we passed Mr. Alberto's office. On the wall was an old pendulum clock, very similar to mine, but it had stopped. The hands were at 3:15, frozen in time. Anna stopped and stared at it. "It's broken," she said, more to herself than to me. "It's a shame. A clock wasn't made to stand still." At that moment, I had an idea. I spoke to Mr. Alberto and he agreed right away. On my next visit, I brought my toolbox. Not the ones I used for revenge, but the ones I had used all my life to repair, to give life. Anna and I sat down at a large table in the common room. Very carefully, I took the clock off the wall and placed it on the table. "How about we try to fix it together?" I asked. A different sparkle appeared in her eyes. It was the sparkle of challenge, of curiosity. It was the same look Jessica had when she saw me working in my workshop. We started slowly. I opened the back of the clock, revealing the complex metal interior. I didn't give orders. I just pointed to a part and explained its function. "This is the escape wheel," I said. "It controls the speed at which energy is released. It's what makes the ticking sound." Her hands, which were so delicate with flowers, proved surprisingly steady and precise with tools. She cleaned each part with a soft brush, removing years of dust. She held the tweezers with a naturalness that couldn't be learned in a few hours. It was in her, somewhere deep down. We spent 3 afternoons working on that clock. The living room became our workshop. Lucia brought us tea and cookies and watched us from afar with a smile. To anyone looking, we were just an old man and a young patient sharing a hobby, but it was much more than that. With each piece we cleaned and put back in place, I felt like I was doing the same with her soul. We were rebuilding something together. We found the problem. A small spring was worn out and had lost its strength. I had brought a replacement part from home. I showed her how to fit the new spring into place. It was the most delicate moment. She held her breath, the tip of her tongue in the corner of her mouth, and with a precise movement, the spring clicked into place. When we were done, we put the clock back on the wall. I gently rocked the pendulum, and then the sound, tick-tock, loud and steady. The clock was alive again. Anna looked at the clock, then at me, and for the first time I saw a smile that took up her whole face. It wasn't a small or shy smile. It was a smile of pure joy and pride. "We did it," she said, her voice filled with an emotion I hadn't heard since I found her again. "Yes," I replied, my throat tight. "We did it." That night, as I was getting ready to leave, she walked me to the front desk, something she had never done before. She was holding the little music box I had given her. "Thank you," she said, looking at me. Her eyes were clear. The fog seemed to have lifted a little. "For teaching me how to fix things." I smiled. "You already knew how. You just forgot." I turned to leave, but her voice stopped me. "Dad?" The word came out as a whisper, almost a breath, a question, not a statement. She said it with a frown, as if the word had escaped without permission, as if its taste was strange and familiar at the same time. I stopped, my whole body frozen. My heart, which had learned to beat at a slow and controlled pace, raced like an alarm clock. I turned slowly. She was still there, with an expression of pure confusion on her face, as if she didn't understand what she had just said. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. I just smiled, the most genuine smile I had given in 3 years. The tears I had held back for so long finally rolled down my face. The mechanism was almost complete. The most important piece of all had just fallen into place. The journey was still long, but that night, on the trip home, the ticking in my head was no longer about time or revenge. It was the sound of my heart, beating in time with my daughter's heart. The word hung in the air, fragile as the glass of an antique clock. "Dad?" My whole world stopped at that moment. The pendulum inside my chest, which marked time with a slow, heavy beat, suddenly came loose, swinging uncontrollably. I wanted to run and hug her, to say, "Yes, it's me, my daughter, my Jessica." But the watchmaker in me, the man who had spent his entire life learning not to force delicate parts, took control. My eyes filled with tears, but my face broke into the most honest smile I could muster. I said nothing. I just kept smiling, letting my silence say everything she needed to know at that moment, that everything was fine, that that word, even if confusing, was safe. She looked at me for another second, the confusion on her face slowly giving way to a quiet weariness. She said nothing more. She just turned and walked back inside, holding the music box. I stood there, there, at the door, until I could no longer see her. The bus ride home was a blur. I didn't see the city lights. I didn't hear the noise of the engine. I just heard that one word echoing in my head, Dad. The next morning, the anxiety was almost unbearable. I wondered if she would remember, if the wall her mind had built would have closed again. When I arrived at the Hope Care Center, I found Anna in the garden as usual. She was pruning some rose bushes with small shears. She looked at me and smiled, a calm, normal smile. "Good morning," she said. "The cold is coming. I need to protect the roots." There was no sign that she remembered what she had said the night before. My heart sank for a moment, but then reason took over. Dr. Ricardo had warned me. Memory would not be like a door that opens all at once, but like a light that flickers in a dark room, illuminating things for a second before going out again. I couldn't show my disappointment. I sat down on the usual bench. "You do a good job," I said, looking at the flowers. "They're lucky to have you." And the day went on like any other. We talked about the weather, about the tea Lucia brought us, about the repaired clock on the wall, which now ticked away the hours with renewed confidence. I understood that my job was not to wait for the next spark, but to continue providing the energy for it to happen. A few days later, Dr. Ricardo asked to talk to me. We sat in his office, the same place where he had advised me to be patient. This time, his gaze was different. There was professional curiosity mixed with cautious hope. "Lucia told me what happened," he began. "Anna didn't talk about it directly, but we noticed a change. She is calmer, but also more thoughtful. Yesterday, she asked Lucia if she had any old photos stored at the nursing home. She didn't say why." He leaned forward. "This is huge progress. Her mind is starting to search, to try to connect the pieces. But this is also the most dangerous stage. If she finds a traumatic memory without being prepared, the shock could cause her to retreat even further." His words were a clear warning. "Keep doing what you're doing. Your stories, the work with the clock, they're safe anchors for her. They're memories of skill and affection, not pain. We need to build a strong foundation before the whole house can be explored." I agreed. Revenge against Marco was demolition. This was construction, and all construction needs a solid foundation. My routine changed a little. In addition to the stories about watches, I started talking more about myself, but carefully. I told her about the apartment where I lived, about the view from my window, about the smell of bread from the bakery on the corner on Saturday mornings. I was painting a picture of her life, of our life, but without putting her name on the painting yet. One afternoon, while we were looking at an art book from the library, she stopped at a page with a painting of a city at night. The lights on the buildings looked like stars. "I think I've been to a place like this," she said softly. "I remember looking out the window and seeing lights like these." My heart raced. She was talking about our apartment. "It's a beautiful view," I replied, controlling the emotion in my voice. "It makes us feel part of something big." She traced the lights on the page with her finger. "Yes," she whispered, "but it can also make us feel very alone." In that moment, I saw a glimpse of the pain she carried, the loneliness that took her away from me. Winter deepened. Snow began to fall, covering the garden with a silent white blanket. We spent most of our time indoors, in the living room, near the fireplace. I brought a chess set Jessica loved to play. She was aggressive, always attacking while I was defensive, patiently building my defenses. I taught Anna how to play. At first, she was hesitant, afraid of moving the wrong pieces. But soon, a familiar logic began to emerge. Her moves became bolder, more confident. She learned to anticipate my moves, to plan ahead. The architect of mechanisms was there, in front of a wooden board. In one game, she put me in check with a knight move I didn't see coming. She looked at the board and then at me, and a mischievous smile appeared on her face. "Check," she said. It was a flash. For a second, it wasn't Anna in front of me. It was Jessica, 14 years old, proud to have beaten her father for the first time. The feeling was so strong that I lost my breath. That night in my apartment, the silence was not one of loneliness, but of reflection. Revenge against Marco seemed like something from another life. I had dismantled that man's life piece by piece and left him to the justice system. I expected to feel lasting satisfaction, a cold peace, but the truth is that peace did not come from his downfall. True peace was coming from those little moments. A smile, a whispered word, a move in chess. Revenge was the end of a chapter of pain, but my daughter's healing was the beginning of an entirely new book. A book we were writing together, one page at a time. I didn't know what the ending would be. Maybe Jessica would never come back completely. Maybe Anna was who she was now. And I was beginning to understand that this was not a tragedy. It was just different. I was getting to know my daughter again, and I was loving the woman she was becoming, with her calmness, her passion for flowers, and her brilliant mind that found its way back through gears and strategies. A week before Christmas, Mr. Alberto organized a small party for the residents. There were colorful lights, soft music, and a table with sweets and hot tea. I was sitting with Anna by the window, watching the snow fall outside. She was quiet, holding a cup of hot tea in her hands. "What are you thinking about?" I asked softly. She took a while to answer. "I'm trying to remember Christmas," she said. "I know what it is, but I can't feel it. It's like reading the description of a color you've never seen." The sadness in her voice broke my heart. I thought for a moment. "Once," I began, "I told a friend's daughter how a clock worked. works. I said that the present is like the escape wheel, which only moves one tooth at a time. You can't rush it, and you can't go back. You can only live that tick, that talk. She looked at me, her eyes full of questions. Maybe you don't need to remember past Christmases, I continued. Maybe you just need to live this one, this moment, this cup of tea, the falling snow. Maybe happiness isn't in the memory, but in the now. She looked at the snow, then at the cup in her hands, and then at me. A small smile formed on her lips. She reached out and, for the first time, touched my hand, which was on the table. Her hand was warm. "Thank you," she said. And then, in a clear voice and without hesitation, she added, "Father." This time it wasn't a question, it was a statement. The clock inside me, broken for so long, finally started ticking again, marking the beginning of a new time, a time of healing. I found the truth, but the price was too high. I hope my story serves as a warning. If this journey has touched you, please like it and help me honor my daughter's memory.